Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. We have a lot to dive in for you this week. So first and foremost, want to make sure that I give a shout out here to the Mile High Sports crew. Make sure that you give them a like, share, and subscribe wherever possible. The boys are boots on the ground out there covering all things related to Broncos training camp right now as the season approaches here with NFL kickoff in just a couple of weeks. We've got Coach Prime and the CU Buffs back in action in just a couple of weeks up there at Folsom Field as well. Avalanche offseason talk, Denver Nuggets offseason talk, and naturally, you're going to have coverage of the Rockies, who had a thrilling comeback this last week, but still, it's just kind of a brief moment of hope amidst a long season full of despair. Again, though, wherever you can, hit that like, share, and subscribe to follow the Mile High Sports Network wherever it is possible. Make sure that you follow them, whether that is magazine, podcast, merch drops, website, all things combined. Smash that like, share, and subscribe. Now, getting into the Colorado rundown, if you have the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to buy tickets directly from the athletes participating on these cards, please do so. That definitely helps them as far as their commission split, as well as growing their platform and leveraging future opportunities. And it's something that is just it supports our community all the way around. Coming up here in a couple of weeks on August 15th, Friday night at the Stampede, we have Colorado Combat Club making the massive return with a show that is going to have a highly anticipated grudge match in the co-main between Micah Haas and Alexander Troy Rego, the Puerto Rican Demon. I fought a couple of years ago on a Fury card. But headlining the show, we have a long-standing Colorado fan favorite in Grant Neal. Grant Neal, the longtime veteran of the Bellator ranks, as well as having a lot of experience across the board out there with high-level combatants from multiple different promotions in the mix. We are thrilled to be able to have him in our main event for that show on August 15th. You have on Saturday of that weekend, BYB back out here for another Stockyard Brawl. Our friend of the program, DJ for a lot of the shows that I work out here on the local scene, and former teammate of mine, Georgie the Buzzsaw Martinez. He's going to be on that card and making his bare knuckle debut. Very much looking forward to seeing how Georgie goes out there and fares. We also have a tremendous opportunity for someone within our Colorado community to go out there and become a two-division women's bare knuckle champion, and that is Courtney Cameron. I'm looking forward to seeing what a couple of these two fighters are able to do out there on August 16th. Make sure that you check them out there. On August 30th, you have Sparta back in the mix, and it's an MMA fight night. There's a few very familiar faces from the Colorado scene that you're going to see fighting on that card, especially in the flyweight division. You have Aaron Beltran back in the mix. You have Oscar Herrera in the mix, as well as you're going to have Oscar taking on Jay Ponder, another fighter who's fought on multiple different local platforms out here on the Colorado scene. Moving away from that and getting into the weekend recap. For this weekend recap, we are taking it back out to Las Vegas. There was a couple of very late additions to the card, kind of surprisingly in that sense. However, there is a couple of fights that we're going to hit on, but first we're going to go through the weekend recap. Getting a little bit ahead of myself here, just looking at the Denver fighters in the mix and getting some updates on this weekend's news. But first, recapping last weekend's show out at the Apex. Guys, we had a flyweight fight in the main event, and I mean, when we're talking about Tatsuro Taira, he really is the future of 125 pounds. The kid is 17-1. His only loss is to Brandon Raw Dog Royval. He pretty much went out there and from start to finish, he outclassed Park. Credit to Park for stepping up on short notice and taking this fight basically on all of a few days, given the injury setback to Amir Albazi. But this was just too much too early in the run for Park. Park was 10-0 coming into the fight, but Tatsuro Taira just, again, he showed from the very initial exchange in the fight that he was absolutely by far and large the superior competitor. Dropped Park in the first and then just continued to work and employ his game all the way until he took the back and was able to finish by that face crank. Tremendous performance by Tatsuro Taira, who does a lot of his training out here in the Denver area. All the people who I know who have trained with him speak nothing but high volumes and praises of this kid. So I love to see that when you have somebody who is training here in our community and everybody to a man says that this dude is A, he's the real deal, but B, he's also a great training partner and a good person to have in the room. The next two fights in the co-main and the feature slot, I told you last week that these two lightweight bouts were going to be having a hold my beer type of situation for who was going to go out there and get fight of the night. They both got fight of the night. An unprecedented thing where two bouts on the card get this honor and get the bonus. In the co-main event, this was potentially, I mean, dare I say, arguably a fight of the year contender between Chris Duncan and Mateusz Romboski. There is something to be said about the accumulation of damage that Romboski has taken so early in his career already in the UFC. I mean, yes, he's 20-3 as far as a professional, but he doesn't have a whole ton of fights in the UFC, and they've largely all been wars. Now, while that is certainly entertaining, it doesn't necessarily make for longevity or a run that's going to go too terribly deep, but enjoy him while he's here, ladies and gentlemen, because this dude brings his hard hat and his lunch pail, and win or lose, he comes to scrap. Chris Duncan on the flip side, man, the resilience that he showed throughout the fight, both of these guys left so much of themselves in the octagon on Saturday. But something that Duncan said was just really kind of resonating. He said, this pain or these bruises, cuts, the future scars that you're going to see that come from this fight, that is nothing compared to the pain and the hardship that I endured as a child. It's like, that's really profound because especially the troubled backgrounds or the tumultuous situations that a lot of these combatants escape and are able to survive from growing up. I've heard it from multiple others out there who have came from very adversity or adverse filled background that, yeah, in the cage, there's a rule set that protects you. They were used to escaping beatings where they were trying to just live in the process. Some of these fighters are coming from impoverished and war-torn countries to where, yeah, every day is a fight to survive. Once you're in the cage and you're dealing with a sanctioned bout, rules, a referee, so on and so forth, it's so much safer in that sense than some of the circumstances that they've already been through on a day-to-day basis. And, while I don't know the exact details of his circumstances by any means, I just thought that that was something that stood out as a profound statement that we've seen time and time again. And yeah, there's the memes out there or some of the underground or the Reddit forums that say, hey, childhood trauma, best base for MMA when they make all of these memes and these jokes. And while it is said kind of with a joking tone, it's also not exactly inaccurate either, which is kind of what makes the meme stick. But moving along from that, we had a thriller between Esteban Ribovics and Elvis Brenner. Elvis Brenner, we said last week, anybody who comes from that shoot the box camp, like they are going to come in, they're going to scrap. Brenner definitely hasn't been on the right side of a couple of fights in the UFC where he's gone to war, but on the flip side, he was going up against somebody who I think is a dark horse and a very underrated personality, and maybe not necessarily personality because he doesn't do a whole lot of talking, doesn't do a whole lot of media, at least stateside and on the promotion end, but his fights speak volumes. 2024 Fight of the Year winner of that fight where they won Fight of the Year at Noche UFC last September. Estevan is a guy who I think has a bright future at 155 pounds. We're seeing some of the guard change at the top of the division and a new wave of that blood that's coming in and trying to stake their claim. I think that he is certainly going to be one of those forces who we will see for years to come at 155 pounds. A few more bouts to discuss here on the UFC Fight Night card before we move along here. You had the captain, Neil Magny, the Haitian sensation. He survives a little bit of adversity early on to come back and secure a TKO from the back mount and look sensational in the process of doing so. I mean, Neil Magny, it was his birthday. Happy birthday, big dog. What a guy. I've had the opportunity to speak with Neil, whether it is just on little occasions, nothing too crazy outside of, like when we had him here on the program, whatever, but he's always someone who will acknowledge you. He uplifts everybody who is around him. And I can't tell you the amount of times that some of the young fighters who have been a part of his team and his camps who have shared tales of the way that Neil Magny has looked out for them, taught them how to be a pro, and taught them how to grow as not just a fighter and a young professional, but as a man, kind of serving as a big brother in the process. And again, when we start talking about who are the people who you should really want to do well or who you should cheer for, Neil Magny is absolutely one of those guys for all of the great things that he does outside of the cage. But then when we look at what he's done inside of it, look at his resume. Yeah, not every fight is a win. But when you look at the names that he has taken the challenge to go in there and step up against, you have to admire that. You have to respect that. He has fought tough contender and rising prospect after tough contender and rising prospect, never denying a challenge, asking for some of the juggernauts and the boogeymen in the process, if you will, and never fearing to go out there and dare to be great in the process. Congratulations to you, Neil Magny, 38 years young, picking up that TKO victory. Another couple to speak on. You had a fun fight between Kevin Vallejos and Danny Silva, Rennie Nakamura and Nathan Fletcher. That was a fun fight. Rennie Nakamura, that's a kid who I think is going to have a pretty fun run at 135 pounds. That's his 11th professional fight. He moves his career to 10-1. I think that he does have some limitations as they currently sit, especially when we're looking at how talented and diverse the skill sets of the upper echelon of 135 pounds are, but the kid is young. He's only 11 fights into his career. If they play him right and they continue to build him, I don't want to necessarily say slow roll him, but have the right curation of matchups in the process, you have somebody that you can build something off of. You had a middleweight fight following that between one of the most decorated male jiu-jitsu competitors of all time and Adolfo Vieira taking on Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore, a former Ultimate Fighter contestant. Tresean is a guy who I think we've seen what his potential is. I know that the UFC kind of had some high hopes for him and I thought that he was really raw based off of what he was able to do with the inexperience or the lack of true technical training that he had. But he lost this weekend in a decision to Vieira, and I just don't believe that Tresean is ever really going to be past more than, at most, a body at 185. Is he going to win some fights here and there? Sure. I mean, he's a scrapper. He's a gamer. He's not going to back down from the challenge. But skill set wise, I do believe that I think that we've seen him top off. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll be the first to be corrected if that eventually plays out. But I think on the counter to that, Vieira is somebody who I absolutely respect his grappling. I do think that he's gotten better as a striker, but I don't see him as anything past a mid-tier he's a very capable and absolutely deserves his spot within the UFC, but I don't see him ever being someone who cracks into the rankings or who is ever truly a threat toward the title or a contender or as someone who the top guys of the division had that fear strucken into him. I just don't see it that way. Maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Chime in at comments from the peanut gallery. Hit me on Instagram or on Threads. Let me know what you think on that one. A couple more fights on the card to discuss before we head off to the next segment. You had Austin Bashi with what I would consider a pretty defining performance for him. He's a very young competitor, came into the UFC, dropped his initial affair, but it was, obviously circumstantial, quick note, a lot of lights, a lot of pressure for a young competitor. But in this follow-up, he gets his hand raised by a rear naked choke. He beats John Giannis. John Giannis was a short notice signing to the UFC. Giannis was a Fury champion. This fight does have to be noted that it was up a class for Giannis, being that it was on short notice, but at the same time, you can't take anything away from Bashi, being that he is an extremely young competitor and he needed to go out there and have a performance that he could get himself back in the winner's circle, back having some confidence and rolling forward as he continues to try to actualize the potential that everybody has sprinkled upon him. Then last one to talk about here on this card, just because she is a former LFA standout. Chatted with her a couple of years ago back in Jacksonville, UFC 273. That's Piera La Fiera Rodriguez. She picked up the split decision victory over Ketlin Sosa. Piera Rodriguez, I do think, has the potential to make a splash at 115. I don't know that she has the same title level actualization potential the way that she did in the LFA in the UFC, but she does have a very fiery style. She's aggressive. She's not afraid to get dirty in the process. And I think that she makes for some fun matchups because she is such a spark plug in there. But we'll see where this takes her going forward. That was a big win for her to take on another strong prospect in Sosa. But what do you guys think? You can let me know after this. Hit me up on Instagram, at comments for the Peanut Gallery, or on Threads as well. We're going to transition over now into this weekend's UFC preview. This is headlined by a middleweight fight. We do have a couple of Colorado boys on the card, a couple of our friends that we're going to hit on. In the main event, though, we have Roman Dolidze taking on Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. I'm super high on Fluffy. I'm a big Anthony Fluffy Hernandez fan. I think that this guy has a skill set that is going to allow him to push the pace. I don't know if he will maybe end up becoming a champion. I can't really forecast that, especially because if we look at the size gap between him and Dricus or him and Hamzat, say for example, there is something that's to be noted there. But he does have a style to continue to make a run. He's a strong wrestler. He has good jiu-jitsu. His boxing is crisp. And that man is hard-headed with a gas tank that never ends. His weakness, the spot where you can beat Fluffy, is you got to attack the body. He's shown vulnerabilities to the body. That's happened against Kevin Holland. Happened against Michel Pereira. But Fluffy was ultimately able to withstand that adversity against Pereira to go on and pull off that victory, and now is marching toward the top five and trying to eventually get a title shot. Fluffy is a guy who he doesn't even really follow the inner workings or the rankings or anything of fighting. He just loves getting in the gym and scrapping. He's a guy who his coaches pretty much have to hold back and have to tell, no, you need to take it down a notch. You need to step back. You need to take some time away. He is his self-described own worst enemy in the gym, and that he'll go too hard. He'll push himself past when he needs to recover, or so on and so forth. He's got a stiff test in Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze is a top-tier grappler in the jiu-jitsu world. I don't know if he has the wrestling to be able to match Anthony Hernandez, but he is a Georgian grizzly bear who has capable striking, and he's just a big body, barrel-chested, strong dude who is tough to be able to manipulate and have your way with him in tight spaces. I think that this is an extremely well put together matchup in this main event matchup. I lean Fluffy, But Roman has a skill set that could also completely neutralize that. That is why they fight the fight. To me, call it a pick'em. In the co-main event, you have Steve Erceg taking on Ode Osborne. This fight is taking place at 135 pounds. Erceg was originally scheduled to face Park, who filled in last week on short notice against Tatsuro Taira. In steps Ode Osborne on just a few days. That is why you're seeing this fight at 135 pounds. At 135, I mean, I don't know. Ode may have better chances all along at 135, being that he is such a long and lanky flyweight that maybe the extra weight gives him some extra pop in his hands. You know, I think that he's a quality combatant, but Ode is also a guy who I don't ever foresee making a title run at 125. But he is a guy who is a quality veteran who's going to give you competitive outings every single time that he makes the walk. Erceg on the flip side, he's had a tough run since having that title fight against Pantoja. And I think that he is a cautionary tale of what can happen when you get pushed too fast, too quickly. You can't really recover from that if you're not ready to make that big jump. He got the title shot against Pantoja by circumstance, given that Pantoja had, for lack of a better term, cleared out the top of the division. And where he was ranked, I believe he was 10 at the time. He was the next available guy that Pantoja didn't already have a win or multiple wins against. He's looking to bounce back against Ode Osborne. It is a winnable fight for him in the process. You have a friend of the program and just a hilarious personality all the way around. One of the longstanding female veterans of the UFC, former Ultimate Fighter veteran. You have Angela Overkill Hill taking on Yasmin Lacindo. Should be a fun fight at 115 pounds. You have Andre Touchy Philly. I mean, to me, he's a fighter's favorite type of guy. You know, he's not, again, one of those dudes who will never make a title run. He may touch the rankings with a few wins and a run here or there, or maybe be in consideration for that mix. But he's never going to make a title run. But he has a fighting style that is extremely fun to watch. He risks it for the biscuit and goes for it every single time. He's got Christian Rodriguez this weekend, and Christian has been a dude who has killed a lot of hype trains in the UFC, has struggled a little bit against some vets in the process, but this is a tremendous opportunity for Rodriguez to go out there and test himself against a veteran who has a diverse skill set, who can mix it up on the feet striking, who does have quality grappling. If this gets to the canvas, though, I do foresee there being an advantage to the Christian Rodriguez side of things. We'll see how that ultimately plays out for him. You have Miles Chapo Johns taking on John Matsumoto. John Matsumoto is a kid who I think at 135 pounds also has a bright future, but is just still really early in his run. I look for this one to go Miles John's way. He's just way too experienced for this matchup. Yeah, boy, Eric Anders, friend of the program. He's on his farewell tour. Only a couple of outings left for him in the UFC. He's fighting out his contract and then laying the gloves down. He takes on Christian Leroy Duncan this weekend. It's going to be a little bit of an interesting matchup for Eric. Eric's pulled off some crazy wins in his career that on paper a lot of people wouldn't think or wouldn't imagine that he would go out there and get wins. Like same the Weidman, the Machidas, some of these outings. You know, it's been a great run for the former national champion for the Alabama Crimson Tide, who has gone into the UFC and just had a fun run and a very fan friendly career. Kudos to you, your boy Eric Anders. Also on the card, you have Julius Walker taking on Rafael Sequeira. Julius Walker, great dude. He's early in his UFC run, but so much potential. He's a big, strong kid with great grappling. I favor him in this matchup. You have Elijah Swift Smith. He is going to be taken on Kazama. Now, Elijah Swift Smith, he is a former amateur as well as professional champion for the Colorado Combat Club. He was a champion in Battle MMA Championship. I don't know if he picked up hardware in his tenure with Sparta, but I know that he obviously was a veteran of Sparta Sports and Entertainment, and then went on, cut his teeth through the Fury rankings, made his way into the UFC last year on the Contender Series and is now into the UFC. And I think that Elijah has such a he's a young kid. He is fast. You can't teach the type of speed that he has. He's a second generation fighter. His pops was on multiple seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. His dad was also an RFA world champion. Coach Gil Smith down there at Victory MMA. Elijah is a kid who I look to see do great things, and this is just the next step in that direction on Saturday. A couple more fights on the card to discuss before we head off to the next segment. You have a matchup between Jocelyn Edwards and Priscilla Cachoeira. Zombie Girl is one of the most hot or cold, hit or miss fighters on the women's roster, I feel like. Maybe just short of Jessica Andrade lately. But she's kind of a poor woman. She's a great value version of Jessica Andrade in that sense. Like, she's violent, she will brutalize you, but if you can get the beat on her, she might fold. You might see her start to find ways out. Jocelyn Edwards is a well-rounded fighter for the division. Nothing special, nothing to write home to mama about. But I think that we could see a pretty competitive matchup here at 135. The question always, I feel like, for Edwards is we got to see once it comes time to make the scale. She is a very large bantamweight in the process from an athletic standpoint. She would be one who, if there was a 45 division, would benefit from having that weight class, but obviously that is not the case. And then rounding off the card, a late addition to it, you have Eric McConaughey taking on our friend of the program, my boy, my teammate, one of my coaches, one of my broadcast partners, Cody Brundage. Cody Brundage is a guy who he's taken a lot of controversy throughout his career. There's obviously some circumstances that aren't the norm that most fighters run into, with clash ahead to some of the DQ by illegal strikes that he's been on the wrong end of. That wasn't Cody's fault that they hit him illegally. That wasn't Cody's fault that he got the clash of heads. It's just something that I feel like is unwarranted criticism from him in that way, and especially when he goes out there and he's pouring himself into these performances. I mean, you look at his last couple of fights that he's had. I mean, that fight that he had in Atlanta that was overturned, to the fight that he had before that against Julian Marquez. Like, how do you look at that fight and not be excited to see what he's eventually going to go out there and become? I mean, that's tremendous potential that you're seeing right there, and somebody who has a bright skill set at that 185-pound division. Now, this is listed on the schedule here at 205. I imagine that that's just simply based off of it being a fight that was put together on Monday to happen here this Saturday. Moving along real quick, we're going to discuss this next week's debut episode of Dana White's Contender Series. Dana White's Contender Series makes its return next Tuesday. You have 5 scheduled bouts on the card. You have a main event in the 185-pound division. But to me, what I feel like is the focal point that I just want to discuss real quick on this card is the feature bout that's listed here. Excuse me. That is a welterweight matchup that is between Jimmy Drago, who's going to be taking on Ty Cole Miller. Ty Miller is a kid who he fought for us here in Colorado, Colorado Combat Club. One of his I think it might have been his second amateur career or amateur fight ever. He's also fought out here on an LFA card where he had a knockout finish against Ryan Charleboy. This kid is the real deal. Comes out of Fit NHB down there in Albuquerque. He's trained for a considerable portion of his life. The kid is a good wrestler. The kid is accomplished in jiu-jitsu. His boxing is crisp, clean, and it is powerful. The way that he understands his range and his movement is definitely abnormal or atypical for someone who is so young and early into their career. This kid, I believe, is certainly someone to keep your eyes on going forward. I mean, if you think take the best qualities from Tim Means and then add like a 10x to them, and then you have a Ty Miller. Ty Miller coming out of that Tim Means camp down there in Albuquerque, for the reference of those who are following along there at all. But again, I look forward to seeing what Ty Miller does. Obviously, there's a little bit of a personal attachment there, just being that he fought for my promotion out here in Colorado. I want to see him do well. Want to see him be another guy who goes on and gets that opportunity at the next level for the big dance. Moving along now to 3 rounds to close out the show for you here this week. The highly controversial and polarizing former UFC champion made his return to the WWE to close out SummerSlam this Sunday. On a scale of 1 to 10, how shocked were you? On a scale of 1 to 10, that was a certified 20. The Beast Incarnate is one of the most profitable combat athlete and sports entertainment superstars ever. Overall, he's one of the biggest freak athletes of all time. Just to quickly recap for you, he was an NCAA heavyweight champion who went something along the lines of like 106-5. He pursued pro wrestling following that, and as a 6'5", 300-pound supremely athletic specimen with a natural look and badass persona, he was a Vincent Kennedy McMahon wet dream. Lesnar immediately became a main event attraction and became one of the youngest champions in WWE history. Obviously, that being the entertainment angle, Lesnar's quest for competition was back. He was hungry to go on and conquer more things, being that he looks like a Viking conqueror himself, kind of fits the bill there. And you could also probably say that, well, he reached the mountaintop so quickly in the WWE that he needed something else to continue to give him a target and a push. Well, he decided to go try to stake his claim in another extremely challenging and competitive field outside of amateur and professional wrestling. He decided to try to take his talents to the National Football League, where he was a training camp signee for the Minnesota Vikings, and his tenure in the NFL was short, only a few weeks in training camp, but he did appear in multiple preseason games, which that's a lot more to be said than most people out there, especially for someone who didn't play college football, who on a whim essentially just said, all right, I am that damn big, that damn athletic, and that damn gifted that I'm just going to go hit the NFL combine, see what my numbers are, try to do this for a little bit of promotion. And then, oh, wait, I did so well that teams were attracted to what they might be able to see out of me. And granted, Brock's profile and ability to draw people to training camps, so merch, blah, 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 that naturally is a factor. But still, there's a lot of guys who don't sit on rosters for as long as he did, nor actually get the reps in games the way that he did. That speaks to Brock's athleticism to even be put in that position. After a brief return to the WWE, Brock was hungry to compete again. This time, he set his sights on MMA. In just 4 professional fights, the Beast Incarnate became the UFC heavyweight champion. He knocked out Randy Couture to do so, where some people then had the criticism that, oh, well, you knocked out an old man, blah, blah, blah. This wasn't a quality victory, if you will. Well, his 2 title defenses, he went on to go and finish these next 2 guys while they're in the peaks of their career. Frank Mir TKO'd him, and then Shane Carwin. So that talk of Brock not being a legit guy or being spoon-fed an opponent who was over the hill, blah, 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 that just went null and void. And through his tenure and many a years beyond, Brock was the highest selling pay-per-view fighter in the UFC until one Conor McGregor came along. Brock's still one of the only names that you see on the top 10 list that doesn't have Conor in the mix. Brock had some health issues, lost a couple of fights, then went back to wrestling, where he then made a controversial return for UFC 200 against Mark Hunt, where, call it for what it is, his piss would have melted the cup. That was a massive controversy, lawsuits, blah, blah, blah. But still, in the meantime, Brock was back in the WWE as a part-timer, but despite his part-time status, he always delivered. Brock was essentially a break glass in case of emergency guy for the company. Need a babyface to get over? Call Brock. Need a fresh story? Call Brock. Need to sell some tickets or move some merch? Call Brock. It was reported that on his farewell tour, John Cena wanted to work an angle and follow through with the program with Brock Lesnar on his way out. Well, I can see that that was something that would push for Lesnar's return, being that Cena has such the pull within the company that he does. They're tagging him as the greatest of all time on this last run out the door. Hunter Levesque, or Paul Levesque, I should say, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H, the game, the cerebral assassin, blah, blah, blah. I can see why he's trying to do what he can to accommodate somebody like John on the way out. It's also been reported that Brock was cleared in connection to the lawsuit for with Vincent McMahon. Now, I have no idea what's true and what isn't when it comes to the legal situation. I just know that as soon as the Beast's music hit, if there was a roof at the MetLife, they would have blew the roof off of that sumbitch with the crowd pop that he received. I mean, seriously, that was kind of Austin-esque, if you recall those old Stone Cold Steve Austin pops as soon as the glass would break. The WWE definitely anticipated that this was going to be a controversial move and that they would potentially receive some blowback and some backlash from the media. They canceled their post-event press conference reportedly because of this reason and because they didn't want to be overran with Brock and legal questions. But I say all of that and mention the controversy with Brock Lesnar, but also I ask you, is there a double standard? Let's take a couple of minutes here just to take a look and see if this Brock outrage is, as I just mentioned, in fact, a double standard. Keep in mind, he has not been convicted of anything. Nikki Bella, WWE Diva Superstar, former women's champion, WWE Hall of Famer, lots of accolades, plenty of time in the company, and was a featured superstar during SummerSlam weekend. She was found guilty of abusing her husband. Cardi B was the celebrity host of the weekend. Yes, the same Cardi B who has admitted to drugging and robbing men. And lastly, hell, I like Jelly Roll, but he's an ex-con as well. Where's the outrage for their participation? Brock has always been a lightning rod for controversy, but that is, love him or hate him, why he is such a larger-than-life superstar. Plain and simple. Round two. Bia Mosqueda has been signed by the UFC. Were you surprised? No. She's arguably the lady goat of jiu-jitsu. She proved herself as an MMA fighter in the LFA cage. I'm not surprised at all. LFA CEO Ed Suarez said the same thing, that it was just a matter of time before Bia got signed. Not surprised at all. Very easy move for the UFC to make. There was a fighter who went viral over the weekend for getting knocked out after doing the Max Holloway point to stand and bang in the center. What are your thoughts? Ladies and gentlemen, there is one Max Holloway. Don't do this. Max himself has even acknowledged that this is a quote-unquote knucklehead move, but he is, as he advertised, arguably the best boxer in the UFC. He has the skill set to be able to do so. You are not Max Holloway. Do not try this. This is probably the fourth or fifth example that I've seen go viral of somebody trying to do the Max Holloway point where they've gotten completely sparked. Not a wise choice at all. But just like that, folks, we are all out of time. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in with us each and every week for this original combat sports programming. You can check us out next week, same time, same place. I'm Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports.